Me to speak about Don when he was young. He left Lakefield at 16. I had a very special event happen when I was 5 years old. My family had moved to the corner of Regent Street and Baptist Lane. There was no one to play with, as the street was inhabited with seniors. Then, out of the blue, a family moved in the first home in the terrace, 2 houses from me. The best part? There was a little girl, just my age. Linda and I became fast friends, and we lived the next 9 years as sisters in each other's pockets. What has this to do with Don Webster, you ask? He was my best friend Linda's big brother. He was 4 years older, and we were the bane of his existence. Don was born in St. Joseph's Hospital in 1940 to Loretta and Ted Webster of Lakefield. He had an older brother, Bill, and 3 older sisters, June, Joan, and Diane, and eventually a younger sister, Linda. When Don was around 7 years old, he and a friend named Malcolm were sent to the woodshed by Don's mom to gather up wood chips to start the fire. Malcolm decided to split some kindling. As he brought the axe down, Don reached in to hold the stick, and being young and not strong enough, Malcolm could not stop the downward thrust, and Don's finger was chopped off. His mom wrapped it and began a trip across the bridge on foot to Dr. Gassel's. Well, you know how far that is from Regent Street to Dr. Gassel's. On the bridge, a good Samaritan picked them up. Dr. Gassel transported them on into the hospital. He was lucky. It was only his one finger. How do you miss all the rest? I don't know. All the boys liked to shoot their BB guns down at the cement plant. Don was one of these. Linda determined that every time he went pigeon hunting, they mysteriously had chicken for supper. You did what you had to do to feed a big family. Okay, I've got to get my pages out. A large pond was between the 2 railroad tracks, one to the station, one to the mill. In winter, Don, Tom Sullivan, and Terry Stenner would scrape it and play hockey. No way would they let Linda and I on to figure skate. Finally, Linda's mom laid down the law, said the boys had to give us some space. Don didn't give his mom grief, so we won, and we were vindictive. Figure skates have nasty picks, you know. And we keep the puck for a while if it came into our space. There was very little downtime for Don. His father was a stonemason, and he required Don to work very, very hard. He was still a young and frail lad. And at 16, Don went to Kingston, joined the Army. He was home again at 17 with a broken neck, having injured himself while doing gymnastics. He had a body cast over his head and down his whole body, and spent a lot of time at Sunnybrook. Lucky again, he had no paralysis. Gord Simpson, the next speaker, is going to continue on Don's military career. He was, to say the least, a perfectionist and a very intelligent man. Okay, Gord.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gordon Simpson, and Don and I were good friends for a long time, and we served most of our military careers together in the same units. And I guess that's why Sharon has asked me to say a few words about his career, and I'm very happy to do so. I went through a little bit of a dilemma. Sharon covered 16, and I'm probably going to be tied up for 50 years here, so please stay with me. But I think how I'll handle this is I'll give you a snapshot of Don's career, and at every juncture you can ask questions if you want elaboration or clarification on anything. How would that sound? Okay. Let me just say that Don's career can only be looked at as a stellar career and a much accomplished career. The career path that he selected was not one that people would normally look at to obtain the Queen's Commission, nor obtain a higher education. Now, Don accomplished both of those. When he retired, he had 25 years in service, and he worked for the mapping and charting establishment in Ottawa at the time, which is a military unit. And Sharon mentioned that he did break his neck early in his career. And of course, that was always something up her mind in his thinking on career moves and so forth. If you were undeployable in the armed forces, you probably weren't going to remain. And so Don's decisions were partially based on, can I continue on with the heavy physical stuff and so forth, or do I have to make some sort of a career move that allows me to continue in an area that we love? And in a couple instances, he made that choice. And he ended up where he actually did receive the Queen's Commission and retired as a captain. In my opinion, he probably could have even stayed a few more years and retired even at a higher level. But this thing with his neck kind of said, I get deployed somewhere and can't go, I might have to leave. So at about the same time, retirement was a question. He applied for and competed in a competition and won it, and became an engineer in the mapping and charting establishment. So he accomplished two very high levels as far as I'm concerned. Well, just have to have a little peek here. Eyes are getting bad. Okay, his first employment in the armed forces, partially mentioned, he was 16 years of age, and you had to be, before your 17th birthday, enlisted in this program, which was referred to as the Army Apprentice Training Program. And he enlisted in July and ended up in Canadian Forces Base Chilliwack, which is a beautiful base, sort of nestled in the mountains and Fraser Valley of British Columbia. He came to that base because he was asked what he would like to do, and whatever it was he said, it was associated with an engineer type trade or function. So that's why he ended up in Chilliwack. Approximately 43, I think it was, in his class. And at the time, he was quite a tall, lanky individual, and maybe a little awkward if he lost a finger, but also quite into everything that was going to be thrown at him in the next 2 years. The program was 2 years and very, very intensive. And there's a couple fellows here in the room that went through that same program. It was so intensive, especially the military side of it, that was probably the main reason most people either didn't make the program or didn't want to continue on after the 2 years. And I'll go over some of these things. on too much. I haven't been speaking for about 25 years. Okay, you had to be 16 before your 17th birthday to continue in the program. And I should say to Joan and Linda that Donnie didn't actually escape a household of girls because he couldn't sign or enlist himself. He had to have one of his parents approve his entry into the program. Now, all boys underwent a very rigorous vetting. I won't go as far as to say it was a very special group, but definitely it was a group that there wasn't many boys that hadn't finished their grade 10 education and were capable physically to go through all the demands that they were going to be charged with. They had psychological tests and IQ tests and so forth. So they were a pretty good bunch of boys when they went there. Don was in the 5th intake that went into this program, and there was about 44, I think, and they joined up with another intake that had completed a full year, and that was the 4th. And so there was these 16 to 18-year-old boys together. So you can imagine what the antics were. I'm not going to cover all of them either. That took place over 2 years. Now, this whole program was very, very difficult, both mentally and physically. And if you've ever seen American movie or British movie where the Marines go through all of this basic training stuff and so forth, well, this program in my mind was like that times 4, because it lasted for 2 years. Now, I've had some difficulty in kind of trying to convey what they covered. So I myself wasn't taught that manner on the course. So I kind of grouped it in things that will maybe give you a little better understanding of what happened. The first group was the military or the recruit training, which covered everything. As soon as those boys stepped across the line into the gate of CFP Chilliwack, the shouting started. And you could hear it all across the base about swing your arms and do this, that, and the next thing. And during that phase, they just kept throwing other things on you, all the weapon training, all the marching and drill and saluting and knowing who was who and what was in each organization, etc. So it went on and on. And that was probably the make or break element on the course. The other aspects which I'm grouping was the formal education, the sort of advertisement for this program was continue your formal education and also learn a military trade. On the formal education side, the aim was to qualify you at British Columbia standards and issue at the end of it a high school diploma. Now, I would say all of those that graduated made that qualification. In fact, the schooling aspect was sort of the, get out of all the shelling and screaming and so forth of what happened every day from sort of 6 in the morning till 10 at night. And it was an extremely good schooling. They only covered the core subjects, the maths the sciences, English, or the Englishes. And other things were like the physical education part of it was so broad and intense that it didn't have to be part of the schooling. Now, included sort of in the military side was the physical side, the making you, a fit and capable soldier. And it covered, I don't know, so many things, circuit training, roughhouse sports like murder ball, and we were encouraged to play rugby and football and every other rough type sport, including boxing was compulsory. And each year at the end of the boxing training and so forth, everybody was required to fight before an audience. They set up a boxing ring in the gymnasium and invited everybody to come watch these guys punch each other out, basically. And you continued until you lost. And then, even after you went through the 80 boys, the winners of each division went on to fight the men within the base. So it could be pretty rough at times. Okay, the other two elements sort of within this overall program was the construction trades. Chilliwack was the school of the engineers, and they had labs or workstations for all of the construction trades, carpentry, plumbing, electrical, and concreting, and so forth. And everybody was required to go through those trades. And it was more than just a sort of a cursory introduction, simply because sometime down the road you may have to make a choice about entering one of those for sort of a career thing. Also, military tend to train you on just about every aspect, knowing that if you're going to get promoted or climb the ladder, you may have any of those people working for you. So even if you're not a carpenter, you may at some time have a carpenter work for you. You should know his job. We're going to have to write a report on and so forth. Now, I'll spend a little time on the combat engineering functions, or the field engineer functions, because this is, I think, a good smattering that everybody got. Okay, just about every one of us had more than enough of these specific little functions that make the core of the engineers its main purpose for being a military organization. And it dealt with bridging or bridges, roads and airfields, demolitions, mines and booby traps, water supply, knots and lashings, watermanship, and I might have missed a couple. I'll just give you an odd example in each of these, just so you understand. If you have any questions, I'll elaborate on. The role of the combat engineer can be summed up by saying that is the organization that is responsible for affording whatever formation they're in some mobility across the battlefield, and doing the same or the opposite for the enemy, denying him. So when we're talking about bridges, these are bridges where the enemy may have blown up and your troops have to get across the river. And there was several types of bridges. Most of them requiring lots of labor in bringing up panels and transoms and decking and everything else. Quite heavy loads for anybody that can't lift 67 pounds and walk quite a ways across uneven ground with it. You go back in another one and do that all day long, come back the next day and tear it all apart, so to speak. And there were various classes of bridges. Ones that Don would be involved in would be the heavy girder one, which is designed to take tanks. It loads up to sort of 100 tons. And then there would be the Bailey bridges, which everybody I think knows about. There's still some of the old wartime, Second World War Bailey bridges existing in Canada, like a big mechanical set to put together. Again, there was a lot of heavy lifting and serious probable hazards if you didn't watch what you were doing. And then you got into bridging in a wet sense, like crossing the river, floating bridge, where you can't put it across a dry gap. And if there's any questions on bridging, I'm trying to keep this down a little bit, so. Okay, on roads and airfields. Oh, sorry. Told you I haven't given a speech in a long, long time. Roads and airfields, it was a matter of either repairing them or blowing them up. If the enemy was retreating, then they blew theirs up and we had to come in and repair them. If you were retreating, you had to blow yours up. And you had to punch holes all over the roads and so forth. Now, it wasn't quite that extensive, but definitely the demolition parts were exercise. We actually blew up parts of the land, not necessarily the roads, but everybody had to be trained in demolitions and how to put a camouflage into the ground and put it, or load it up with 30, 40 pounds of demolitions or explosives. And that would have been sort of a low explosive, and then with the high explosives of taking down bridges, cutting the I-beams, etc., putting ring mains on and all of that type of stuff. Not only a dangerous function, but one that required you to learn very well with the possibility of you doing it sometime in the near future. Mines and booby traps, most of the boys enjoyed that very much. Put them in an empty house with all different types of devices. Some were pressure, where you stepped on, and then they would have some sort of a charge on the end, like a firecracker type thing. Big bang, or you had pressure release ones where you stuck under a table leg, and then you had some that you put cross paths, you kicked. So it was an area that most boys really enjoyed. I'm going to hit my buddy by putting this somewhere where he's going to either step on it or move something, so forth. Water supply, an engineer function, and it would be utilized in most, I think, areas, especially desert areas and so forth, osmosis type of water purification. something they would use like where John Lanny was in the Middle East, rather than drinking out of the Suez Canal. Watermanship was probably one of the most enjoyable tasks. That was ferrying trucks and personnel across rivers and lakes, etc. This was done at a lake site called Cultus Lake. And of course, the boys got to swim and so forth. And actually had a lot of fun in doing their own little things like turning the rowboats into things with a big pole sticking out the end and putting somebody on the end of it to get knocked off by the other rowboat coming at you. It was the fun part. Knots and lashings, basically something the Boy Scouts do, knots and something. But had its place in things like gins and derricks and doing several other things. Okay, that's about as brief as I can get on the boy soldier part. Any questions? Or?
What would the complement be? How many boy soldiers, if I may use that term, were there?
Well, in Don's intake, there was about, I think, 44.
44?
Yes, 44 boys, all 16, few 17. And then they joined up with my intake, which started off with 37. What we had after the year, I'm not really sure of. But there was approximately 80 boys, 16 to 18 in the squadron. And they were, I should have mentioned this before, they were paid the whole sum of $37 a month, which was not bad when you take into consideration you had accommodation and food. However, they didn't give you all that 37. One of the very first things you were hit with is you had to buy blazer and flannel. Now, you couldn't wear any civilian clothes until after 3 months. And then when you wore it, it was the blazer and flannel. So they didn't want to throw all these guys out on the public before they were absolutely sure that they looked like and acted like professional soldiers. They threw your civilian clothes all in lockup, and it was after 6 months before you even could wear the pair of jeans you walked in with.
Were you a career soldier?
Yes.
How many years did you serve?
I was about 39 and a half.
Good working period.
Yes. About as, I think at the time, because I was a boy soldier, because I was extended somewhat, because all Army personnel had to leave at the age of 55, and that's taken their leave and so forth before that time. I did not take any leave I had until after, because I was held on until my replacement came in. Okay? Now, after the boy soldiers, and when they, I should say, when the boy soldiers graduated, the change between when they came into the forces, like when they marched on the road, step on everybody's heels and so forth, to when they graduated 2 years later, the change was phenomenal. They were truly the pride of at least the basic show-off. They were so sharply dressed, so good at their drill, so good at just about everything they had to do. And when they got out on parades and so forth with the rest of the base, it was like night and day. In fact, I think John, I should remember Major Duff, who was the commandant of the school. And all of the troops would be lined up and you would hear, "Page squadron attention," and then you'd hear, and the commander of the boy soldiers would say, "Apprentice training squadron attention," and you would hear, and everybody, what? Instead of every rattle of every foot, they were really sharp soldiers, and most of them went on to be very fine NCOs, and some, of course, went on to officer status. Now, Don's first posting after he left the apprentice training squadron was to Bloodfield Squadron in Petawawa. That he would arrive on the ground about 1959, and very early in the squadron, he was identified to go to Egypt and serve with the United Nations Emergency Force, which he did. What you do in a field squadron, I cover most of it. All those engineering items. There's usually a very, very broad training plan, and you go through these demolitions and bridge building and all that, to the point, and this is sort of the aim, so that you can do all of those things at night. And when you do such things as demolitions and bridging and so forth at night, it becomes quite a serious undertaking. In fact, that's the only injury I ever had was in there doing bridging. Any other questions? Okay, after he was posted and served in the Middle East, Egypt and Israel, along the Suez Canal, I'm not sure what his specific duties were, or responsibilities, but usually it's either associated with some engineer facet, or it could be just as much as patrolling and reporting and so forth, trying to keep the two apart and ensuring that they don't cross in the no man's land type thing. So when he came back to Petawawa in late 1960, Don had to make that other decision. Am I going to be climbing in the back of trucks and jumping out and doing all of these rough things and the physical fitness side? He knew a few of us that were in the mapping and charting establishment at this time, and he decided, yeah, I have to make a career change. So he was sent to Ottawa. At the time it was Army Survey, and that was the sort of thing Don was looking at, survey. And it was a 6-month course. Higher math was necessary, and Don, of course, was into the schooling part quite heavily. Math was no problem. Schooling during his basic course was no problem. In fact, he went on to take extra math. And he did take enough extra subjects to qualify for approximately a year's university. After he passed the course, which I should mention, there's kind of the mapping and charting establishment is a military organization, but it was involved in national mapping. And at the time Don came to it, the 150,000 mapping was complete, and the whole unit, which was a map production unit, was involved in mapping Canada at a 1 in 50,000 scale. And there are thousands of maps in that scale. There wasn't, or is, a national mapping agency, but it was the sort of the requirement by the military that was pushing the mapping in Canada at the time. And the national agency was very happy to have the military, oh, thank you very much. Excuse me. Was extremely happy to have the military involved, and gladly turned over the roughest, toughest areas of Canada for the Canadian soldier to survey and map and so forth. And that was the Rocky Mountains, British Columbia. Now, Don didn't hit it where they had pack horses and horses to get to top of hills and mountains and everything. But there was a lot of walking and so forth doing the survey. It also served the last project, and the last bit of Canada to be surveyed was Ellesmere Island. It's a huge, huge island. And Don would have served at least 2 surveys on the island. And why the civilian mapping agents were happy as well, we had the cargo aircraft. We knew how to ship big loads, long distances, and so we took care of all of that type of stuff. Now, I won't go into details how big a project, but the last thing our organization completed was removing oil barrels that we used to supply the helicopters and whatever other things that used gas and oil up there, like compressors and so forth. There was over 1 million oil barrels that we took out of the Arctic. So that gives you some idea, the scope of, the land coverage and so forth. Now, in the mapping charting establishment, Don did surveys, but his love on the job was photogrammetry, and he became an expert at that. He, after a few years, also became a completely qualified surveyor. But photogrammetry, which was taking an air photograph, which was covered with another one, or partially covered, and then using it in 3D dimensions. So, I mean, you've been to 3D movies with the 2-colored glasses and how everything stands out. Well, in that business, they had like $200,000-$300,000 machines that give you a much, much better perspective. And you took the survey information, put it on those photos so that you can extract all the information on the topography, the contours for the mountains and the rivers and so forth in precise situations. Don was so good at photogrammetry that they actually sent him to the University of New Brunswick for a school year. And University of New Brunswick at that time was sort of the top university for surveying and photogrammetry and so forth. So he completed that with honors, went on to take even more courses. Loved the job. Had at least another year of upgrading on his education. And then they recommended that he go to the UTPM, which is a university training plan for men. And was sent to Carleton University in Ottawa for the 2-year program. That qualified him for a Bachelor of Science with a mathematic specialty. That combined with his high level of surveying, top of his field in photogrammetry, having served or managed a division of people who were involved in the lithographic process, the big printing presses and cameras that had 38-inch films that were part of the plates for printing of the maps. He ran that organization for a year. And they said that's all we need for to be an officer, and he was promoted, I think, in 70, or approximately 70, to an officer. And again, as I said before, once he got to the 25-year mark, he had to make a decision what he was going to continue with. He applied for an engineering job. He had a science degree, and he was evaluated, having a science degree along with extra math, plus a full survey qualification, a full photogrammetric qualifications, and all the other jobs that he had done over the years. He was granted an engineering equipment. So he did quite well. Well, unless there's questions. Okay. Who's next? I should just make one comment because of the Legion. The profiling of the war veterans of the Lakefield, that was just an absolute labor of pleasure. And excuse me. It was much of a thank you to Lakefield, the vets, and the military that you really loved. So it was nothing to Don in terms of cost or effort. It was just the labor of love, and thank you.
I think this is playing games with us tonight. If you can't hear me, please hold up your hand. What I think I'm going to say is important, but, if you can't hear me, then don't hold up your hand, because it may not be that important to you. Quickly before I start, I just want to thank Sally, Sharon, and Sheila for the most wonderful display. Just fantastic. Just thank you very much. You ladies did a fine job and a memorable job. Yes. I want to talk about Don. Many of you know Don, but as our president and as a hard-working, dedicated member. a champion of the Veterans Project. Indeed, he was all of that, but he was much more than that. I'd like to share a few other accomplishments that Don achieved that are very, very important and meaningful to our Lakefield Historical Society. Many of you do not know that about a dozen years ago, and when you get up my age, how do I know it was a dozen or 15 or 20? I know it wasn't 8, but anyway, it was some time ago. Our Lakefield Historical Society was quite stagnant. And there wasn't much support from you people. And perhaps it was because you weren't presented things that were of interest. In any event, it was in a rut. We had a pretty good start on a collection, but it rested in 3 cardboard boxes, not sorted, not categorized, so on, in the porch of President Michael Townsend's house, subject to whatever weather, because the door to the porch was usually never closed. Very unorganized collection. We kind of had a feeling that we knew we had something, but I don't know right where it is. Give me 6 weeks and maybe I can find it. Our material and our assets, our clippings, etc., were stored haphazardly, very disorganized in those 3 or 4 cardboard boxes. Interest had somewhat waned, and in desperation, and perhaps in not any other apparent solution, our executive thought the best solution was to donate all of our collection to the Trent University Archives, which is a good organization. They preserve things very, very well. You almost have to get a character recommendation to be able to look at anything, and you can only look at one specific thing. You can't go in and research and browse to find a number of things. But they had passed a motion to do that. Really, when you stop at the after effects, that would have been the end of our historical society. Like, why would somebody run around and get all these pictures and all these collections and so on? So you could take them down to Trent University so they could never be seen again, unless you wanted to say, I want to go and look at what you have, a picture of Tom Junkin. Then you could go and look at Tom Junkin, but you couldn't see his brother Dick. No, because your mission was so. Anyway, Don learned about this, and he became ardently and actively involved. And he assembled a group of members and recruited some others and attended a meeting, and he found out before that the majority of our members did not want at all to have the collection ever leave Lakefield. And I think that same statement persists today. They don't want it farmed out other places. At the next general meeting, the motion was rescinded. And there was considerably renewed enthusiasm emerged, and our society thrived. Our membership went up very close to 100 people. Incidentally, there's a discount in members. If you haven't paid your membership, you can pay it this evening, and there's a discount on it for early payment. You can get it for $15. So please, we count on the revenue from memberships. If you haven't been a member, you have no idea the benefits of being a member. It's just fantastic. It's getting tough when you can't read your own writing. My printer's broken. And, yeah. Don and I became aware, or had been aware, and concerned that Lakefield's first settlers, first European settlers, the John and Margaret Nelson family in 1818, not to cast anything on anyone else, but a lot of people think it was Samuel Strickland. Well, Samuel got here in 1831, 13 years after Sam and Margaret Nelson. But he made quite a splash when he did get here. I'm not minimizing his contribution, but John and Margaret Nelson were the first settlers. And we felt they were not given due recognition or credit. So with the support of our executive, we arranged a plaque to be cast and mounted on a huge boulder retrieved from a fence corner of what was a Nelson's working field. And we had that boulder. Don had some connections with Cheshire Sand and Gravel and Buckhorn. They brought their huge big front end loader down here to Lakefield, went into what then property owned by Dr. Gibson, retrieved the biggest boulder we could find, brought it down and erected it on Caroline Street in the little park owned by the Trent Waterways, and we put the plaque on there. We had a dedication ceremony that was very good and was attended by about 30 direct descendants of the Nelson family. And many of them met each other as cousins, didn't know that they came from the same Nelsons. It was well attended. We're very proud of that. Don was a big factor in that. He would have drove the front end loader if they hadn't sent him in. On yet another occasion, Don and I made several trips to Campbellford in pursuit of a beautiful book. It turned out that this book became very valuable, which I'll just outline a little more later on, but we made at least 3 trips down to persuade the Campbellford Seymour Historical Society to donate that book to our Lakefield Historical Society. We finally won out due to Don's persistence and a bit of my blarney. Now, a little bit about that book. That book, and get this, we're Lakefield people. That book was titled Canadian Wildflowers, and it was published in 1868, 151, 2 years ago, 51. And it was sketches by Agnes Fitzgibbon, and the Fitzgibbons were a Lakefield family. They were somewhat descendants of the Nelsons, and I think Agnes was part of that. And I don't know who this other person was, Catherine Parr Trail. She was a famous lady and a citizen of Lakefield. It had been owned, this book had been owned by Ross Robertson, John Ross Robertson, who was a prominent Canadian philanthropist. He owned the Toronto Telegram. He made money hand over fist, and he gave it back to the public fist over hand. A couple of John Ross Robertson's achievements, in case you thought he just was a wealthy guy. Well, at one time he interviewed Louis Riel. Now, I wish I had been there to ask the odd question myself. And Robertson also spoke at John A. Macdonald's funeral. So he wasn't just a plunker. Anyway, he owned this book. We now own this book. And it has been valued between $3,500 and $4,500. And no, we're not lending it out. These are but a few of the achievements that Don had that I don't think many people knew of. And it was crucial. Like, I don't doubt if he hadn't got active with the support of Sheila and several others, our LHS would have ceased, or would have just been a body and name. The other thing is, and many of you wouldn't be able to see this, but Don and I had a lot of fun. We spent hours and days and meetings and here together, and we enjoyed one another and had a lot of fun. We did a lot of traveling. If Don were with us tonight, other than in fond memory, I know that he would be disturbed if on his behalf credit was not given to his executive, and also credit was not given to our rock, the one person who always wants to stay in the background, never wants any credit, doesn't want to be known as a key contributor. That would be Sheila Garrett. I know Don would never forgive me if he knew I was to talk like this and didn't mention Sheila and all the support and background you have offered to Don, me, Ted, and everyone. Thank you very much. I've said enough. Now, I think also, am I correct? I'm to lead into the next one? Yes. I see a whole bunch of hands back there. You can't hear me, eh? Good. I gotta take time. You gotta have a bit of fun. I gotta tell you one little joke. It's a very short one, it's quick. Okay. Pat and Mike, they got word that a faith healer was coming to town. And he was having a ceremony, and you know, Pat and Mike were rather Catholic by nature, but he was having a ceremony in the Pentecostal church. And Mike said, you know, I'd like to go. I'd like you to see what on. Pat said, oh, you'd just be wasting your time. He said, there's nothing to that. He said, you're going. Well, Mike said, I'm going to go. So he went. The next day, he runs into Pat. Pat said, how'd it go? Well, Mike said, just like you said, Pat, just a bunch of rubbish. Why, even halfway through, the guy in the wheelchair got up and walked out. The Lakeville War Veterans Project, and I like to be given credit for starting it. It wouldn't have had a very good finish or even an endurance if I'd had to continue, but anyway, I think and it happened because when I reflect upon my youth in Lakeville, I realized that I was beneficiary to some special times. And years later, when looking back, I realized that most of the benefits and pleasures emanated from Second World War veterans who had returned, and they were involved in scouting organizations, church organizations, hunting, fishing, baseball, hockey. They were involved in all aspects of things that made this village tick. They willingly supplied hands-on encouragement to us in any of your activities, if it was in any way positive. They give you praise, direction, and often a boot where the sun don't shine if needed. As the years flew past, time took its toll, and our veterans began to pass away. It bothered me that many whom I had known and appreciated were nothing but a name. And people knew vaguely of the name, but they didn't know what they did, or they didn't know what they contributed to life other than serving in the war. And sometimes even all that was forgotten. I would often reflect upon these soldiers, sailors, and airmen who made the supreme sacrifice and who also served and gave up their families, their loved ones, their routine for war. I question many of the remaining veterans about those in the service, their pre-war, their war, and their post-war activity, their family. I queried about those who had moved elsewhere, those who were less known. All were heroes to me. I wanted to establish, record, and preserve their involvement in both war and in our community. I wanted others to have knowledge and acceptance of them as contributing members of our village and our area. I wanted to see them as real people and not just a name. I started to collect and to write about what I had learned. And it was not very long till I recognized that I was overwhelmed. So I then made a presentation of my idea and my material to our Lakefield Historical Society. It was unanimously accepted as a project, and it has only ballooned and blossomed since then. Our Veterans Project was well on its way. Thank you very much.